Welcome to the Faith Legacy Series, which is designed to help families grow spiritually. This series helps parents and teens connect around important topics through the preteen and teen years. The event you're about to experience is designed to help you approach high school graduation with your Christian faith in mind. Chap Clark, author, professor, speaker, and youth worker, will help you consider what's most important as you launch into the adventure that is life after high school. Let's listen in as Chap talks with a group of teens and their parents about how they can be sure to take what's most important with them when they leave home.
We are here to talk about something that is actually a rather odd name, okay? It's called Sticky Faith. It's a weird name. I didn't come up with it, don't blame me. But a bunch of really smart people that I get to work with kind of got together a couple of years ago, actually about 6 years ago now, and tried to figure out what is happening between young people who grow up kind of as, in middle school and then into high school, primarily from churches, but sometimes from other organizations that have at the center of their organizations or the church this trust in Jesus, this belief in God, this connection to a church, and then what happens when they go away from high school, whether it's college or military, and they kind of leave the house. What happens to them? Because there's a lot of people out there that are saying that an awful lot of kids, after they graduate from high school, they really graduate from a faith, even if they have kind of a lifelong faith. That's what a lot of people have been saying for a long time. So I'm actually part of a school, a place called Fuller Seminary, that has people that study theology. That means what's God up to in the world? Intercultural studies, that's kind of to understand different cultures, and then school of psychology to understand who we are and how we relate to each other. And we had a bunch of people that are studying teenagers and families and marriage and church, and we all got together and said, we got to figure this out, and we did. We did this major study, and continuing now, even to this day, and that is the Sticky Faith study that tried to figure out what makes faith stick when you leave. When you graduate from high school, and in our research, actually, and we'll be talking about this a little bit as we go, what we determined is the very best kids, the students, and I say kids because I'm old, I'm somewhere between 38 and 58, okay? I am. Until this thing comes out, and then I may have to change those numbers. All right. What's interesting is that, as teenagers kind of grow up and graduate, according to our research, and it's hundreds and hundreds of students we've been following, 80% at least across the board in the U.S. Say they're going to stick with their faith. That the faith they grew up with, in their family, in their church, in their organization they're part of, they love Christ, they want to follow Him, and they're going to take that right on into college or military, wherever they end up going. Over 80% say at the end, by the day they graduate, I am going to hang in there as a Christian. And what we determined was, we mostly studied the best of the best. Looking around the tables, that would be you guys. That's those of you at home or in your church watching this. You're the best of the best because you are most likely seniors in high school with parents or step-parents. Maybe some youth workers are with you guys, some grandparents, and you kind of hung in there to this point where you're 17, 18 years old, and you're ready to ask these questions as you go through your senior year and get ready to leave the house. That's the kind of students we studied. And what we determined was after 18 months, roughly half of those students that said, most of them said, we're going to hang in there, had basically either taken their faith and kind of put it on a shelf, or they completely walked away and said, yeah, it's just not me anymore. I'm just not that interested anymore. And we kind of want to know what happened. Why did that happen? And everything we're going to be talking about through this entire series is to kind of look at that thing. So the first little point, we got three kind of little sections to this deal that's a fantastic thing as we kind of unpack this. First of all, I just need to help you guys to understand something and let your parents understand something. You have a little outline there before you. Faith that doesn't stick. Now, one of the things we have to talk about is not just faith. We need to talk about just kind of growing up in general, because in the church, what we so often say is that, people go through faith development, whether they're 3 years old or 7 or 12 or 16 or 22 or 35. And as you grow up, you go through a lot of changes and different stuff happens as you try to figure things out. And yet, as a believer in Christ, as a person that goes to church, as someone that takes faith seriously, we kind of act like, well, if you're going to love God, you're going to love God. You're going to be a Christian. And it's like there's no development, there's no kind of changing of a depth of what that means. We kind of separate those things, that you can be a developing 12, 15, 18-year-old in your life, and yet as a believer, we're told the same things in 7th grade that we are in 10th, that we are when we're seniors in high school. We can't separate what we call human development from spiritual or faith development. What you guys are going through and what you're about to be launched into is a faith development period that's kind of going to hit a crisis point. It does hit a crisis point for all of you. Because as you leave the home and you start doing taking care of your own kind of life and making your decisions, where does faith fit into the mix of that? Well, first, growing up is different today than it was when your parents grew up. And some of your parents may not even buy into that. They may go, in fact, a lot of parents will say this to you guys as seniors, you've probably heard it a million times. I get it. I completely understand what your world is like because I've been there, right? And they give you that line, and you act like you guys know, you have no clue what you're talking about. But parents actually think that things have changed exactly the same since they went to high school in 1936. I mean, exactly the same. And here's part of the problem is as adults, when you get out of junior high and high school and you start moving into adulthood, what we do is we kind of take all the weirdness of our own adolescent experience and we don't really know what to do with it. So what do? It's kind of like the yearbook of our soul. We dump it into a shoebox, we put tape around it and get a Sharpie and write high school, and we take that shoebox and we shove it into the garage of our soul on the shelf. And then your parents go, hey, high school, piece of cake. High school, awesome. High school's fun. In fact, here, you ever heard this one? I love this. High school is the best time of your life. Anybody ever thrown that one at you? And then when they do that, then you go, oh, great, perfect. So what you actually mean by that is that this is as good as it gets. That's what you're trying to say. Life will only get worse from here. Thank you. That's very helpful to me as a 10th grader who hates everything. Okay, great, awesome. And this is painful even for me. My 2 worst years were 7th grade. Life's changed. Life has changed so dramatically, and it's changed kind of exponentially. It's getting much more complicated. It's getting much more difficult to know what the rules are and what the roles of people are and how we navigate into adulthood. In fact, scholars tell us, and we're going to spend a lot of time on this, but this is important for you guys to know that 30 years ago, when your folks, or 25 years ago, when they graduated from high school, on average, most of them would be considered an adult. And you were an adult because basically you had kind of landed and settled and inserted yourself into adulthood. But today's adolescence lasts for, literally, I'm not kidding you, scholars talk about this. For women, it goes to the mid to late 20s. For men, mid to late 40s. That sucker goes on and on. I mean, Will Ferrell. Just imagine Will Ferrell being your dad. Oh my gosh. It's changed so much. Today's 23-year-old is the developmental equivalent of a 17-year-old when your parents graduated from high school. Where you guys are now is equivalent to about a 9th grader 25 years ago in terms of how ready you are to insert yourself into adulthood. And most high school students go, that's not true. But what you need to realize is once you get out of the house, you're going to realize that there's a lot of stuff about this growing up thing that you just haven't thought about before. That you think you're thinking about it, and all the little deals we did before, great, but it's different today. And here's kind of the reason, and as people have unpacked what's happened, for all of time in every culture, there were 2 stages of life. You were either a child or you were an adult. And when you were a child, in any culture around the globe, you were basically led by all the adults. You were loved and you were cared for by all the adults. And therefore, you had all these people surrounded you. As you see there, the second point, what kids need, what adults offer, is children in every culture for all of time, if their biggest need has not really been food and shelter and those things that are obviously essential, but they need people. To grow up, you need people, and for every culture, all the kids belong to all the adults. And that's basically true up until about 100 years ago, and that was still kind of true until about 30 or 40 years ago, and that thing started to fall away. Why? Because more and more adults got more and more busy, more and more fragmented, and what you guys really need more than anything is people in order for you to figure out how to get yourself through this thing called adolescence and insert yourself into adulthood. And when you get out of high school, there's hardly anybody there. And you need this thing, we call it social capital. Capital is a word that you'll learn eventually. It's what your parents are going to need if you go to college, okay? It's resources. Social capital are people resources in your life. Well, what about your family? Well, your family now, we live in a culture now where parents, you guys are in charge of everything. The media blames you, education blames you, coaches blame you, everybody blames, it's your job. And so parents are trying to work with kids and go, it's complicated. Life is harder now. We got to figure out how to get people in your life. But see, 30 years ago, if you had a coach, the coach was told people, what do you do for a job? I coach kids. Oh, really? What sport? Well, football, basketball, volleyball. Today, you ask a coach, what do you do? I coach football. And I take kids and I put them through the machine of football and then I make sure they're good at it. And if they're good, I run with it. If they're not good, we just cut them and move on to the next kid. Same thing goes with music and dance and drama and just about everything in life. Life is about performance and conformity. And in the family, we're doing the best we can to somehow remind you that life's deeper than that and richer than that. And then you bring in the faith in the mix. See, this is where you can't separate human development from spiritual development. Because life is the world you've grown up in, all of you guys, whether you're here live or you're sitting at home or at church looking at this, the world you've been brought up in the last 20 years is a world that tells you basically your value and your worth and who you are as a person is what you're good at, is how well you fit into somebody's agenda for you, is what kind of image you portray. It's about doing life. And so if we do life well in English, then we have English teachers that like us. If we do life well in a sport, if we do life well in music or drama, and unfortunately that's exactly what the church has become. See, that's what that question is, what about faith? Here's the problem, why so many kids kind of fall away to the side, is that they've learned that faith is one more thing you do. That your belief in God is more about my job to somehow do Christianity. And as soon as you leave home and you get launched out of here and you go into college or whatever, basically what ends up happening is that you think that, I got to do school, I got to do friends, I got to figure out all the stuff for me to make it through life. And then, I got to remember I'm a Christian. I got to read my Bible because God's kind of ticked if I don't read my Bible. He folds his arms, he furrows his brow. That's part of his face. That's a brow. I learned that when I was in college. That's why my parents paid a lot of money, okay? And God goes, I love you. Now read your Bible. I love you. Pray. I love you. Give money. Maybe you've learned to tithe 3%. That's a joke, but obviously it's not that dang funny, at least in this crowd. Okay. As opposed to something deeper. See, the problem is, we've basically been raised in a culture where our parents are doing the best they can, and a few friends, and a few people in church, and a few people around us, but ultimately, for so many of us, do we really have enough of the social capital for us to feel solid? That life is deeper than how I perform. That I'm more meaningful than what I'm good at. That words like gifted and talented are not limited to kids that are book smart. But they're a gift of God to each one of you guys. You are gifted and you are talented according to the scriptures. Every single one of you. And yet it takes social capital to remind you, even though the world says over and over, and everything you experience in here, life's about performance and conformity and image. But the reality of this gospel you've been handed, it's not about doing. It's about simply trusting. The challenge for you guys as teenagers is learning how to trust a few people, to get some capital in your life before you leave your high school years, before you're done with your senior year, to trust that there's some adults that'll care about you, not for what you're good at, but simply because of who you are. And that's the church. Now, some of you, depending on how much time you got until you're actually launched and out of here, it may be just a few months, it may be a whole year. But the beauty of this thing is for you guys, it's learning to trust adults and it's learning to trust yourself. Because sticky faith, 80% intended to hang in there. Because faith was something that was real, but so often it was about doing. And faith is not about doing. Faith is about trusting Jesus Christ. And the doing follows the trust. And we'll be talking about that. And to trust Him is you need to have enough people around you to walk with you, to hear His voice through them. You need capital. You guys, in order to really make it in college, military, wherever you end up going, you just need to let a few adults in your life. You need to start sharing your life a little bit more openly than you ever have in your whole life. You need to explore what you're feeling and thinking and wishing and dreaming, what you're regretting, where you feel sad, where you feel good, and allowing a few people to kind of surround you so that when you go to college, you're not just kind of thrown out there to the wolves. That's the challenge for you guys we'll be talking about tonight and in the series that we're looking at in this one. Challenge for parents is parents and grandparents, step-parents, our job is to create an environment that's a holding place for our kids before they're launched. Our job is to make sure they are ready and prepared with the relational, social capital that they know absolutely that despite whether they do well or they fall, when they hit a home run, when they strike out, when they're sad and lonely and afraid, or when they're just doing great and feeling good about themselves, that they've got a choir of people, a sticky web of people around your kids. And that's going to be tonight. Because the kids that made it, the students that held on to faith, all the other outcomes worked out too. They were also better friends to other kids at college or in the military. They also were stronger people. They also had a stronger voice and a sense of self as they move forward. And that's basically what we're going to be talking about tonight. How do you develop that strength and ultimately that strength in Jesus Christ? So when you get out of here, you got a sticky faith, a faith that lasts. So that's kind of our first deal. If you want to turn your page over, you see we're going to now spend a little time doing some discussion questions. This is going to be fun. Here's how we're going to do this. To get you kind of ready for this, we're going to break you up into two different parts. If you're not exactly sure which you are, there's only one difference between the high school kids and the parents and grandparents. One difference between you. Gravity. Okay? Wrinkles and backs and things. Oh. See, at this stage of your life, you guys need to start learning that your parents are a lot the same as you are. In fact, the only difference between you guys and a 60-year-old is gravity. Seriously, every 60, 70-year-old in your church, every single one is a sixth grader lost looking for their locker. Next time you see some old person that's like, they get mad because we got all those high school boys that can't afford belts. Their pants kind of come down here and you kind of see them around. And they all say, look at the clothes they wear, but they're wearing their pants up to here. Come on. You got to be kidding. Whether they're here or here, we're still the same. But we're going to, for the discussion, we're going to start with parents. We're going to give you a chance, parents, to kind of begin to get used to giving capital to your kids. So that's your first discussion question. You're going to do this at your table, parents. Even everybody at your table hear this, even if you got 2 or 3 families at your table. Here's what you're going to be doing. Each adult here to look at your kid in the eye and describe one character trait that you appreciate about them, okay? Not, oh, I just love it, you kicked a goal in soccer when you were 8. Awesome. Now, one character trait, something about who they are as a person that you admire and you love. And make sure every adult does that for every student at the table, okay? Then, kids, you guys do the same thing to your parents, okay? Now, it'd be a lot easier for the seniors in high school to do this because they're much more used to telling the truth and to speaking openly and thinking about the things that really, but they're not so used to telling you, but they're so used to describing this with their friends. That, by the way, when you look at a bunch of teenagers together, that's all they do, you know. They just hang around affirming each other. That's basically high school right there, right? So parents and grandparents, you do it first. And after you've all done it, then kids, you look your parent in the eye, mom, dad, step-parent, parole officer, whatever, you know. And you say, some character trait. I really appreciate this about you. All right? And then when you're done with that, then families, you kind of spread out as families for a few minutes. Take 15 minutes for the whole thing. Spread out as families. And then you do that second part there where the parents tell the kids and kids tell your parents. You'll see that on your sheet, okay? Any questions? Perfect. Go.